right. And welcome to our title slide. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing so I can send or read off some housekeeping information. Bear with me. All right, hello, welcome to this session of CAREapy. These webinars are produced by the Committee on Audience Research and Evaluation, and that's one of the American Alliance of Museums professional networks. CAREapy webinars are intended to connect our members and share professional expertise. My name is Erica Kwam. I'm with Purdue Galleries in West Lafayette, Indiana, and today we're going to be talking about social media benchmarking. Just a few quick housekeeping items before we start. We are recording today's session and we'll have time for a Q&A at the end. So in the meantime, I'm going to keep you all on mute. So please enter any questions you have into chat and we will address them during and after the conversation. We also plan on making this webinar available on AAM's YouTube. And Laureen is linking the Essential Evaluators blog in the chat, so please check that out. These webinars and the blog are kept free of charge, so we'd like to encourage you to consider joining AAM and our CARE Professional Network as a member. And with that, I'll turn it over to Laureen Trainer. Laureen is a CARE board member and the co-author of the AAM blog, Essential Evaluators. Laureen?
Great, thanks, Erica. And welcome, everyone. Just a few quick introductions and then we'll get started. We have Hannah and Jessica with us today. So Hannah Ridenauer LaFrance is the research manager at the Cleveland Museum of Art, and Jessica Ketz is the digital communications manager at the Cleveland Museum of Art. Really excited to have them here today. Evaluating social media posts has only become more relevant in the past year of our lives and will continue to be so. It is not one of those things that I think we're ever going to go back to the way it was when we didn't really know what to do with social media. And so really excited to have them here. As their own admission, they are still learning as they're going. So just to say, even a year into this, there's still a learning curve, still trying to figure out the best way to do this. But really wanted to play off of the information that they provided in the Essential Evaluators blog. I went back and was looking at the date. It was a blog that came out in December of 2020, which isn't that long ago calendar-wise, but feels particularly long ago. And what was really interesting is that initial call that went out for the museums went out in like August or September. So we're now talking about data that happened maybe July 2020, maybe June 2020. And so we really wanted to revisit Hannah's posts, what she talked about, and see where are they now, right? She gave us a little snapshot of their beginning, which she teased a little bit of a phase 2 in the blog. And so we thought this was the perfect opportunity to check in with her. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Hannah and Jessica and just thank them for writing for the blog and then presenting for us. And just to let you know, any questions throughout, pop them in the chat. I'm going to be kind of monitoring that. And I will be sure to let Hannah and Jessica know as part of that. So I'll turn it over. Thanks very much.
Great, thank you, Laureen, and thank you for the invitation to talk today. As well as, like you said several months ago, to contribute to the Essential Evaluators blog. It is hard to believe that I both wrote that so long ago and yet not that long ago at all, and also that it was posted. And thanks for the reminder of kind of where we left things off with this audience. So yeah, as was previewed, we're going to be talking about our social media benchmarking project that we initiated about a year ago at the Cleveland Museum of Art. I'm joined today by Jessica Ketz, who I'll let introduce for herself in a little bit. But first we wanted to talk about our individual departments and our roles at the museum, and then we'll jump in a little bit to the project. So as far as research and evaluation goes, my current role as the research manager in the department means that I am one of 3 internal evaluators at the Cleveland Museum of Art. Our organization has had internal evaluation in some capacity since 2009, so over a decade now. And it has certainly evolved and taken many different forms over the years. As I'm sure with all of you, this past year has required us to hone different skill sets and to take on different projects. But we, like a lot of other internal evaluators, support the data needs of all of our colleagues from a variety of departments at the museum, and everything from very structured evaluation projects, formative, front end, summative, and remedial, to just being one of the primary data hubs within the museum. So we're also responsible for things like attendance figures, and of course, an understanding of both our existing and our kind of target or potential audiences. I have been at the CMA since 2015. So I've seen us go from our highest attendance year on record, which was just a couple of years ago, to now dealing with the pandemic and intermittent closures due to the pandemic, and trying to reach our audiences in new and exciting ways. And I will turn it over to Jessica briefly to introduce herself and her role at the museum.
Hi, I'm Jess Ketz. I joined the CMA in December of 2020, so I am fairly new, also meaning that I joined right in the middle of the pandemic. So that has been quite an interesting transition, starting a new job during the pandemic, but I'm extremely happy to be here at the CMA. I am the digital communications manager, and we are a small but mighty team of 4. Previous to working at the CMA, I worked at annual giving at Case Western Reserve University. So I was the digital marketer there, and I had a role where I had a crossover between marketing and fundraising. So I am extremely familiar with data analytics and using that data to inform marketing decisions and marketing strategies. And as we will show you today, I'm very excited to be able to bring that experience to the Cleveland Museum of Art.
Yeah, and it was really exciting for Jessica to join the CMA team. We always are excited when people come into new roles and are familiar with working with data, and it's always a great opportunity to collaborate on projects. But as you may have figured out from Jessica's timeline of working for the museum and Laureen's introduction and the blog post, Jessica actually joined the museum after we had initiated this project. So it's been a really interesting process, both of her sort of being presented with this wealth of data upon starting at the museum, and also having her guidance on what her goals and needs are. And it's been really helpful in as the project evolves to have her input as she sort of takes on social media at the museum under her wing. So I know some of you may have read the blog post and be somewhat familiar with phase 1, as Laureen indicated, of this project, but I wanted to give a brief introduction or reintroduction to the origins of this project, which I said, started last March. As with I think pretty much every museum in the U.S., we were suddenly tasked with reaching all of our audiences virtually or digitally, whereas before we were mixing it up both virtually and in person. And of course, for evaluation, that meant that a lot of our projects that were required to take place in person, those timelines needed to be shifted. And we knew that there was increased interest and expectations on the work of social media to engage our audiences and keep them engaged during our closure. So the CMA first closed due to the pandemic in mid-March of 2020. We reopened in late June, and then we worked through a second museum closure from mid-November to mid-January. So we've been reopened for the second time about 2 months now. But still dealing with capacity limitations and all of that. So there is still a lot of focus on reaching our audiences virtually. And our department, Research and Evaluation, has been grappling with this question of social media and how to study that for quite some time with our marketing team. And admittedly, it was one of those things that we just never could figure out how to tackle it, and it admittedly sometimes got on the back burner. And with the pandemic, we suddenly had this opportunity to really take a closer look at it because other projects were put on hold or redesigned. And this was largely fueled by this desire to understand those gaps in knowledge of what software like Slack and Google Analytics that the museum already uses to understand kind of the back end of social media and web audiences, but really to understand that outreach, especially in the larger scale of arts and culture institutions. And we also had leadership and many other levels of the museum really encouraging many departments, including communications and external relations, to increasingly make decisions from a data-informed perspective. And so we actually approached our marketing team last March and said, I think we finally can do this project. And of course, they were grappling with having to take on a lot more responsibilities of reaching audiences virtually. And so it was one of those things where the social media needs were changing so quickly that we realized that our responsibility here as evaluators and as researchers was to be able to lend our experiences with data and encouraging data-informed decision-making to say, okay, let's just start and see what's out there. Let's just start collecting data and we'll see where we need to go with it. And that has evolved many times over in the last year. And I say this is very much a hybrid model of a project because it started out very formative. We just need to get the data so that we can inform goals. And then once we inform the creation of those goals, we need to keep collecting the data in order to measure against those goals that have been created. And of course, remedial and summative because social media is constantly being redesigned, but also it exists as kind of a semi-permanent state once it's posted. And so phase one, as I've shared in the blog post, we had these rough guiding questions, but it really just guided us with what data we need to collect and in what forms. And there was a desire at many levels of the institution to understand not just what was going on internally with our audience, but how to grow our audience and to understand how the field at large deals with this. And so we were trying to look at comparative data from other art museums. I think we selected about 24 other art museums, including our own, to look at, as well as major museums and cultural organizations in Cleveland. How were they reaching their audiences during this time? And we were looking at everything from follower counts to summarizing what the content was that these posts were putting out, because most organizations are putting out dozens of posts across platforms per week. We really tried to synthesize this by only looking at kind of what was that top post per week, which we equated to being the one that was receiving the most likes. Of course, internally, that the most likes might not equal the greatest number of impressions, but since we had no way to compare that across other institutions, we wanted to look at it from that kind of equal lens. And then, once we presented those results, that phase one took place kind of roughly over the spring, early summer. And we spent the summer really thinking about what those results meant and how to tailor this project for more long-term use. So we decided we thought we had learned enough about kind of the Cleveland cultural social media patterns and where we fit into it for the time being. So we reduced it to just art museums, and we got a lot of feedback all the way up to our director on which art museums we kind of wanted to include in this study. And so it was reduced down to just 14. We continued to do monthly follower counts, but we had gained a lot of knowledge about what the content of those posts were, that we could switch from this inductive coding of just dealing with all of these summaries we had written about the posts to more of a deductive method of knowing that there's going to be posts about programming and exhibitions. And we really tried to take this approach of putting all of our preconceived notions about what we thought was going on social media to the side. We really wanted to go into this kind of assuming we hadn't ever looked at social media posts of art museums before. We really wanted to go into this as unbiased as possible. And we continue to note those likes or favorites of kind of those top posts per platform per week. So I know Jessica wanted to talk a little bit about on their end, what that data-informed decision-making looks like.
So for us in the marketing department, we are currently working on the marketing plan for our next fiscal year. And of course, given everything that's going on and with everything changing so rapidly, it's important to be flexible in those plans while also being able to think ahead and sort of predict and think strategically about how to reach our audiences in new ways, given that everything will be different going forward. So it's important that the marketing team at the CMA works with the research team to look at research and data so that we can inform our marketing plan in a numeric and very calculated way, so that we are able to make those decisions, not just based on what we feel is right, but what we, can look at with hard evidence. So in terms of our audience, we have an audience that is mostly Cleveland based. But of course, now that we are in this pandemic world right now, there is an opportunity to expand that audience base beyond what we currently have. So looking forward, we are looking to expand our audience to not just Cleveland and the Midwest and the States, but internationally as well. We are also looking to make our audience more diverse, not make them diverse, but to pay more attention to our diverse audiences and cater more to the diversity that has been going on in our current social situation. In terms of being realistic and setting qualitative benchmarks, we want to set qualitative and quantitative benchmarks. And we can do that by tracking data and comparing with our internal marketing goals. And it sort of goes both ways. So, first we start out looking at the data to inform our marketing goals and our strategies. And then we use those strategies and watch them flourish and unroll, and then turn back around and look back at the data and see what we can learn from our evaluations. And then lastly, it's really important to be open to experimentation. So we talk a lot about flexibility and being in the COVID times, but it's really important to be experimental and to be strategic about those experiments in order to build tactics, and for us at the CMA, for us to be able to reach those diverse audiences and to be able to expand our audience base beyond our local audience. It's really important to experiment and try to reach people where they're at right now. So once again, it's really important that after we take a look at this data and we try new things and we look to see how our audience is responding, that we go back and evaluate how we're doing. And that's always a process that is extremely important, and that's why Hannah and I are here and fostering a relationship with this new initiative between the marketing department and the research department.
Yeah, and someday Jessica and I will be able to have a meeting in person. So we wanted to give a couple examples of what we've learned thus far from phase 2 of our project, which, like I said, is ongoing. We try and report kind of a summary of what we're seeing on a quarterly basis. So the data you're going to see here is representative of October through December social media activity. I'll be reporting kind of the current quarter we're in, January through March, in the coming weeks. And I, for one, am certainly excited to see, what things are staying the same and what things are shifting. And I do want to just, serve as, I do just want to remind everyone that, we know this is just one sample of a very large picture of what social media is and is currently doing for museums. And we, of course, look at it in that lens, knowing that it is not providing the whole picture because of the way we need to approach this project. We're not really recording the posts that aren't as successful, and we kind of have to read between the lines a little bit to figure out what those are. And so Jessica, from her knowledge of what all the CMA has put out, can help us fill in those gaps a little bit in the knowledge. So one area that we looked at for October through December was like the format of those posts. Like if you think about on Twitter, or Facebook, or Instagram, is it text only? Is it highlighting an image? Is there a video associated with it, or is it a link that's trying to get you to go to another site, a blog post, a news article, something like that? I don't think it'll be a surprise to anybody who is active on at least one of these sites that different types of posts seem to have different levels of success. Even amongst those top posts by platform. Videos are a lot more likely to do well, apparently, on Instagram among the institutions we looked at, whereas on Facebook, the links are doing a lot better.
Yeah, and from a marketing point of view, social media went from being a tool in the toolbox to being sort of the glue that held things together. So it's become the main point of communication with our audience. And so it makes sense that these numbers and this data will vary from platform to platform, because it's important more so now than ever that we talk to our audiences in different ways on different platforms, and not just in on these different platforms, but in different ways in terms of like videos and text and other sort of creative ways that we can come up with.
Yeah. And of course, this is summarizing those 14 art museum top posts that we looked at. And when we split this up further by organization, we were able to see, how the CMA is doing in this larger scale of kind of art museum audiences on social media, especially because we know people who currently visit art museums, currently engage with art museums on social media. They're pretty likely to follow multiple museums or visit art museums around the country. And so there's admittedly some expectation that our audiences overlap in some way. So Facebook, we can see that the CMA is more of one of the outliers there, actually, in terms of like what posts for us are doing really well. And again, this is like just in that 3-month period. So it'll be interesting to see how this continues to trend when we can look at this in a slightly larger sample. And Jessica, let me know if you want to go back to any of those individual platforms. But we can also see that on Twitter, as well as Instagram, we're a little bit more aligned with maybe what other audiences of other art museums are responding to. And it was also kind of reaffirming our assumptions of what we thought would work. Twitter seems to clearly be a very image-friendly space, whereas Instagram has the ability to embrace some more interactive media types. And then another thing we wanted to look at, which I think is a really good example of how we continue to evolve this project, is these tones of posts, which admittedly weren't something we thought we were going to look at first. As Jessica mentioned, the qualitative element of this, especially the way we sample, is really valuable. And she came to me after I presented these initial results back in, I guess, January, and said, we're really trying to think about the tone and the approach of these posts and vary them by different platforms. So what is the data currently saying is working? And again, it kind of reaffirmed to us that Twitter is a space that can be a little more informal in posts that isn't expected on Facebook, or at least those humorous posts don't do as well on Facebook, at least for CMA and comparable sites. And we have this like bank essentially of content summaries now of all of these posts that we can look at through any number of segmentations, and to really understand what's going on with audiences and what they're responding to, and as those new queries pop up. And I think it's a good reminder that just because we're collecting this data now doesn't necessarily mean it won't be valuable in the future. It may even be more valuable in the future when those internal goals and needs change and evolve.
For the context of the numbers on the difference between the humorous posts on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, it kind of makes sense if you think about it, because Twitter, like Hannah was saying, is a bit more informal, and you can have a bit more fun. That's a place where you'll see a lot more memes passing around. It's really, really easy to share on Twitter, a really short little comment, and that's what people want to see on a tweet. And that, results in the 6% of tweets. And then in contrast, the Instagram posts and Facebook posts, it's a little different in terms of sharing. And Instagram is a little bit more about engagement in terms of comments. And then Facebook is a place where you can, reshare to your feed, but it's a good platform to give information rather than, those quick little quips that you would see on Twitter.
And I don't think these results or the other kind of format of those posts really surprised us a ton. But again, it's one of those things like it's really helpful to reaffirm our opinions and reaffirm what research says is going on industry-wide, or even just across certain platforms, what's going on with the way people interact and engage on these sites, and to see that even within the microcosm of art museums, these kind of still are the case. So that's just a couple of examples of information that's come out of our ongoing data collection of these across those three platforms. And so, like we've said before, this project was really intended as a way to enable communications and external relations to be experimental, to enable them to feel empowered to shift their goals and their needs, which will in turn enable us to shift the needs of the project. And as we continue to move forward with this, admittedly, we are having discussions about like what is the time commitment involved in this? Is there a better way to be analyzing and reporting the results? And then at what point do we feel like we maybe have like enough data? I know that's something most evaluators will feel familiar with, especially with the qualitative data, that you kind of keep going until you feel like you've seen all of the patterns and exhausted all of the patterns. And certainly this year has been a really unusual one in social media. And so we definitely want to continue tracking for the time being, as things reopen, as life returns to some new normal perhaps, and see how the needs of our audiences on social media impact their engagement. But we will probably continue to evolve the metrics that we collect and how we collect them as this project continues. And I think for me, this project was a reminder of what we as internal evaluators can bring to projects like this that maybe aren't rooted in maybe a traditional evaluation that is talking directly with visitors. It's more of like a data mining project, but we're there because we can be those unbiased representatives in both data collection and analysis. We're not the ones generating the posts or uploading the posts. We certainly want our organization to engage with audiences, but we can be that voice of presenting the data in a responsible way and helping to inform those decisions, and really just bringing it to the table and making sure the data is always at the table and is always helping to inform those discussions and those strategies. And so like we've said, this project really is continuing to evolve and shift. Yeah, and we will continue to take a look at it as the pandemic changes and all of that. And I'll turn it over to Jessica to wrap up here.
Sure. Yeah. So once again, we just want to reiterate that now is a great time to experiment, and that it is okay to fail. That is the way we learn. I think there's like a little bit more forgiveness or flexibility now, given this time of uncertainty. So experiment now while we have that. And then going forward, we want to think of what has changed and what will change forever because of the pandemic. We don't know what that looks like yet. And in a way, if you think about it, social media, not just in tactics, but overall is a whole bit one big experiment, because we don't know what it will look like after the pandemic ends. Will it return to the way that it was before as just one of the tools in the toolkit, or will people still be heavily relying upon social media to give them all of their information for what's going on in the institution? And then in terms of alignment and relationship between the research and marketing goals, it is extremely important for us at the CMA that we are informing our marketing decisions and setting our marketing goals using research that will help us to be successful. And then lastly, it's really important that Hannah and I and the marketing team and the research team, continue to foster the relationship and continue to communicate our changing and shifting goals, so that we're able to stay in alignment and really reach the goals and the priorities that our institution has set upon us.
Yeah, and we'll leave it there. And if there are any questions, we'd love to hear them.
Yeah, so just remind everybody the chat is open. Go ahead and please post your questions. We have one already, but I want to give everybody just a moment to kind of process what you heard, what you might want to hear more about, some areas that weren't touched upon, or anything that you just want to clarify. But we do have one question from George. I was wondering if you did any primary research, such as posting a survey link on Instagram. Our experience with the transitions online is that we are reaching new people. So one question might be whether they had visited the physical museum in the past.
Sorry, Lorraine, could you repeat that? I was having a little trouble hearing you.
Sure. It is also in the chat too, if you want to open it up so
okay.
we can
Yeah.
read along. But I was wondering if you did any primary research, such as posting a survey link on Instagram.
So not directly with this project, but due to trying to limit in-person surveying and intercepting at the museum, even since we've reopened, we have been engaging social media more as an avenue to poll our visitors about either title testing or other projects like that. And so we have been able to gain a lot of those demographics and visitation information through those projects because we are using social media as the outlet for those. And yeah, definitely has revealed, as have program surveys that have been done for virtual programs that we've done in the past year, that we definitely are reaching audiences definitely outside of our region, which we always have. You know, the CMA, while a destination predominantly for a local population, does get national and international visitors. It's exciting to see that we're gaining the same reach international or virtually rather, and even that's including people who have never stepped foot in our building but are engaging with us virtually. So it's really exciting to see, and definitely is helping to inform programming going forward at the museum, now that we know there's an audience for virtual programs, even if they never intend to make it into our physical space. So it's really exciting to see.
Great, thanks, Hannah. And then Deborah had asked, I think in reference to probably just a lot what you had mentioned on that last slide about this is the time to experiment, this is how we learn. If you could provide examples of some of the experiments that you've done as part of this process.
Sure. So in addition to experimenting with tone, specifically on Twitter, I did mention that we have been trying some memes, and we did try that on Twitter and Instagram, and they did really well. People are responding to them really well, and I think that also is a reflection of the time we're in. You know, we want some humor in with our art. Another example is that you know, there are national or international holidays that happen every year, but during this time of the pandemic, there's been a lot of social justice movements, or there's been a lot of specific focuses on certain diverse groups. So we've been experimenting with having themed posts. So for example, during the African American month, or the Black History Month, I'm sorry, we posted specific posts throughout the month with artworks by African American artists in an effort to educate and take part in the conversation of Black History Month this year. Or it was Women's History Month. It is Women's History Month still. So we also have been trying posts focusing on women artists in our collection. And they've also been very well received. And so, you know, we're trying to, you know, reach our marketing goals and our institutional goals of being more diverse in our messaging and our perspective, while also you know, experimenting and seeing what people will respond to. And I think it's been well received so far.
Great, and I'm skipping down a few because I think this is the flip side to that question, but Dr. Joe Elliott asked, what sort of failures have you encountered?
So Hannah, I don't know if you have an example, but one of the examples that comes to mind is mostly around videos. we look at failures not as something to, be ashamed of. It's something that, comes with learning. And so, at one point we posted a video and it didn't look good on our feeds. We really couldn't see any of the content that was being displayed. And um and so we took it down. Like there's nothing wrong with that. It just didn't really fit the tone and style of our branding, and so we took it down. And I guess I would consider that a failure, but also a learning experience for us, in terms of seeing what works best on our platforms. So I hope that answers the question.
Hannah, did you have any kind of from the evaluation research side of failures during all of this?
I think, mulling over that, I think for me it's more, knowing that unless we are, directly engaging audiences, we're never really going to get the full understanding of why some engagement is or is not working, or why we're able to reach certain audiences and not others. And again, I will, a lot of what we try and present in our reports internally we'll often pull from other projects that we've done. We've done a lot of work with our marketing teams over the past few years on target audiences, and how to engage them, and how to reach them through marketing means. And so social media is one that is admittedly kind of still a struggle. It's something that we found a lot of audiences who aren't already engaged with the museum just aren't thinking to, follow local museums on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. And so kind of finding our way into those audiences is still a struggle. But, our hope is that, through engaging in social media, and figuring out what creates popular posts and viral tweets and all of that stuff, that we'll find other avenues that remind people that we're out there, remind people that we're open again, and gradually work towards the goal of using our online audiences to turn into in-person audiences.
And I'm going to just follow up. Irina had a question that I think touches on that a little bit. Of how did you reflect on the absences from social media communities due to various obstacles, i.e. access, age, technology, any factors? And how do you plan to capture those that are not represented in your current samples?
I'm assuming that's, go ahead, Jessica.
Oh, yeah. What were you gonna say? Sorry.
I was just gonna say, I'm assuming that's referring kind of to our understanding of who those existing audiences are on social media. Yeah, and so I think it's a lot of, it's those efforts through focus groups and more formative and front end work to engage our audiences. And it isn't so much through trying to reach them through social media, but sorry, that wasn't phrased right. It isn't so much through expecting them to find us on social media, but figure out ways that it is just commonplace to seek out your cultural organizations, and that you want to engage with the content. And then once you find them, you find that interests intersect, and you want to continue to engage with those organizations. So our work with underserved communities in Cleveland and our local target audiences is definitely ongoing. It's definitely one of our big goals for this upcoming fiscal year, to support both marketing as well as other departments in that work. And it's multifaceted. It's everything from the exhibitions that we offer, to the programs that we offer, to the way we engage with audiences virtually. So more to come on that, but yeah, something we continue to work towards.
And to the how are we planning to capture those that are not represented in our current samples, you know, that's what this plan is for. We're hoping to find different ways to reach those people, and we do have some ongoing projects that we have started and that will come to fruition in soon. And they're not specifically social media based, but we do have, you know, community presence and a strong community presence. So, you know, word of mouth is still very much alive. So, so we are very lucky to have that presence in our community that is able to you know, disseminate information and reach out to those people that we could not reach through access to through technology or due to age restrictions or you know maybe disability restrictions or something.
Great, thank you for that. We have two semi-related questions about demographics. Liz had asked, I believe you said that you were looking at demographics. What data did you look at to understand the demographics of the individuals interacting with your social media posts?
Yeah, so that was something that, again, we weren't able to perfectly triangulate, you know, which audiences were engaging with which posts. But other projects that we were using social media to get our data collection instruments out during the same time period, we were able to ask for demographic information as a part of those surveys. And so we could sort of assume, you know, if you're engaging in this survey on Facebook, for example, in November of 2020, you're probably also seeing a lot of the posts that we're putting out. And so, yeah, that's one way that we sort of use multiple projects to meet the goals and the needs of Jessica and her team in understanding who we're serving on social media. Yeah, because it is one of those areas that it can be a challenge to really understand the audience you're reaching on social media. And with those surveys, I always set up separate collectors for each platform so that I can see how survey results compare across the platforms, which is really helpful to know, both from what we understand, you know, field wide about which audiences, especially in terms of age, are likely to use certain platforms. We can make sure our data set is representative of that, that we got a decent response for the audience that we're told nationally and internationally is on these platforms, as well as to understand how those audiences differ. You know, we know that our Facebook audience is older than our Twitter audience, which is older than our Instagram audience. And that's been, and that's something that has, you know, been studied nationally and internationally, but it's very much the same for the museum. And so that also can help inform the types of content and the approach to the content that is put on those platforms. If we're talking about kind of generations and what they're likely to respond to and the types of content that they might be interested in. And, you know, that is also something that we're still trying to figure out how to mimic. And another thing I'll say is that, you know, we're trying to figure out how to kind of keep up with changes with these platforms. You know, Twitter recently started doing their fleets, similar to Instagram stories. And how do we measure that? And, you know, Jessica does a lot with Instagram stories and Facebook stories. And that's something else that it's difficult to track, both on Slack as well as through other means of engagement. And so we still have these unanswered questions of how to really measure the full social media efforts towards driving on-site attendance. No easy answers there.
Yeah. If you could just solve the social media problem in, you know, one afternoon, that would be fantastic. Jessica, do you have any tools or, data sources to analyze the audience demographic beyond geography?
I look into each platform's data individually as well. And that helps inform me, it will tell you, if your audience is more male or female. It will tell you when the busiest times are to post, and the most responsive times when your audience is online and on social to post. Um, in terms of beyond geography, um, we do have the data that Hannah mentioned about, how our audience does kind of fit in with the, audiences, across the board. Um, but we do know, for example, that our Instagram followers, for example, are more into aesthetically pleasing posts. Whereas our Facebook audience, because they're older and because Facebook is in a way an online diary, it is more apt to people who like to read longer posts that are more informative and more educational. And then on Twitter, we know that our Twitter audience is an ever-changing one. And so while we can't exactly nail down exactly what our Twitter audience is right now, in terms of specifics or demographics, we can make some assumptions, and that is actually one of the platforms that we are looking to enhance moving forward, because we don't know as much of the demographics specifics on Twitter.
Great, thank you. We had a technical question here. Were GIFs or GIFs, I think they are GIFs, counted as image or video as part of your analysis?
In terms of the posts that actually got logged as those top of the week, I don't recall a ton of GIFs. Memes, yes, but less so GIFs. I think in the few cases we looked at them, I think they were counted more as images, because we tried to keep videos as something that is attempting more of a narrative approach, something that isn't necessarily going to just continue to cycle. But yeah, I don't think those came up. And I don't know if that's just because the museums we were looking at aren't using them a ton, or just because they weren't making it to the top post of the week. Admittedly, so I was doing the data collection on Twitter, and my colleague was doing the data collection on Facebook and Instagram. And so I can only speak anecdotally for the full data set on Twitter. So maybe on Instagram, he saw a lot more GIFs that just maybe didn't make it into the top post. But I can't speak for that too much firsthand. Jessica may know better. How often those are used out there?
Yeah, for our social, we do not use GIFs, or at least not currently. And I do the regular overview of social of peer institutes, and I really don't see that many GIFs. So I would be interested to know, how those do as well. But yeah, I actually have not seen any, I don't think, GIFs on any of the museum feeds as yet.
Well, and speaking of platforms, and I embarrassingly misspelled TikTok in a a text message the other day. Are you using TikTok? Is that kind of part of what you're going to be looking for in the future? How does that play into your strategy?
Yeah, that has been a question that has circulated around the museum a little bit. I think that it is an option, but we also want to think about, what's the sustainability and what's the longevity of TikTok? Will TikTok be around after the pandemic is over and we return back to the new normal? Or will it be something more along the lines of Instagram Reels? And then in terms of the sustainability of it, that's just, one more thing that you like really have to plan out and you really have to think about in terms of content. Um, I don't know how many of you are familiar with, creating TikTok videos, but they take a little bit more effort than they s- than they look because they turn out to be these quick 30-second cool looking TikToks, but the effort and the editing that goes into them is not something that's quick per se, and it has to be planned out, especially when it comes to the institution and making sure that we have the people and the interest and the ability to keep it going once we start it. That's probably the most important part of our strategy.
Great. All right. We just have a few moments left. Jessica and Hannah, if you could just share, one thing that surprised you during this process that you didn't expect to see or learn.
I will say,
oh,
go ahead, Jessica.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
We're on the same timing today. Go ahead, Hannah. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I will say, and this is more from when I'm collecting the data on a weekly basis. And it's one of those things where it's like, all right, I'm glad I wasn't also the one like generating these posts, or else I would get really attached to them and want certain ones to do really well. Because even as I'm kind of scrolling through a 7-day period for each institution that we're looking at, I'll go through and I'll be like, wait, that one's great. That one has to be the one that did the best. And then it isn't. And something else beats it. And I can't figure out why. And so that makes me go back to the drawing board and be like, I'm not the expert in times of day to post these things or other things to boost engagement. But I still, having looked through all of the posts and anecdotally being able to say what works for certain organizations and what doesn't work, I'm constantly surprised by what audiences really react to. And maybe one day I'll figure it out. But I'm usually very surprised about what does well.
For me, I wouldn't say, I'm going to go back to the memes because that is something that was just introduced when I came on, and I really wanted to put it up on our social, and I knew it would do well, but the surprising part was how well it did. And I really think it, sometimes, you really have to jump on the train of memes and things that are trending and happening. And that's kind of hard to do, to keep up with the meme culture, because it's like there 1 second and gone the next. You really have to get the content either going, and you really can't prepare ahead because it happens like, in a moment. Like you blink your eyes and it's there, the next minute it's gone. But yeah, so the surprising thing for me is how well those memes performed. And sometimes, it comes down to luck. It's really like, it really comes down to the moment that you post it. It's either seen and gets a lot of attention, or you can post it and it's great, but no one sees it. And so, sometimes it's just a little bit of luck.
Great. All right. Well, we are at time. Hannah and Jessica, I want to thank you so much, not only for your time to write the blog, but to join us and follow up and let us know what you all are up to. So much appreciate that. And just a little plug, the latest Essential Evaluators just came out on Monday. I put a link in the chat, so go ahead and check that out. And thanks to everyone who joined us today.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks
Bye,
so much.
everyone.